is Tarcila Rivera Zea. She is one of the most recognized indigenous activists in Peru and the world. For more than 30 years, she has been defending indigenous rights through her organization, Chirapac, and her involvement in other networks and institutions focusing on indigenous women, children, and youth. She served as a member of United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues for the 2017 and 2019 period. And currently she is the Continental Coordinator of the Continental Network of Indigenous Women of the Americas. There, she is also a founding member, Ms. Rivera Zea is also founder of the International Indigenous Women's Forum. These two networks foster leadership and political participation of millions of indigenous women around the globe. Tarcila, thanks for joining us, and I'll pass it over to Ghazali for questions.
Thank you so much, Tomo, for doing the intro, and Tarcila for joining us in this webinar series. Really appreciate it. Work with you on many different levels, particularly at the World Conference, in the World Conference process. So let's jump right into it. Tarcila, like in the conversation before, I have something that came up. One of my observations, for example, with Binota, and by the way, you can speak in Spanish. That's very fine. That people are not doing things anymore that's good for indigenous rights, but doing what's right for the next round of funding. Like Binota said, like project activities and everything else. What's your perspective on it? Do you agree or disagree? Where do you sit on that? And welcome.
Thank you, Ghazali. Thank you, Tomo. Thank you, also the interpreters. I will speak. As you all know, I come from a generation, from a time where convictions and ideas about fighting for the rights of the indigenous peoples. I'm talking about before the 80s. I'm 17 now, so when I was your age, I was trying to look from the local perspective to the global perspective. So I can tell you that in that context, there were no funding, there were no scholarships, there were no means to participate in the movement. So in that at that time, that experience gave you some force, some strength to fight for the rights, no matter what opportunities there were. But nowadays context is very, very different, because one thing we have to take into account is that every generation has had an important role, and I think that the new generation has a lot more of challenges, because they must try not to prioritize only the individual focus and not only the funding, and that's a great challenge, because if we or the new generation lose the perspective, the fundamental fighting for the rights perspective, we will easily find ourselves in a scenario in where many individual groups are competing against each other for the funding, for the different opportunities. So I see it as a great challenge for this next generation. there are many opportunities, and what you need to know, the new generation needs to know, is that we haven't got anything easily. Everything that we've conquered has been a great struggle, so we have to value everything that we have nowadays. I think that the new generation that really knows better the system, they know more languages, they know the structure of the states, but they also have that big challenge of trying to develop more strategies of the appropriate exercise of the new diplomacy, as it's called nowadays. So they have to think how to use the existing mechanisms, the existing tools, to obtain results that benefit all of us. And we are seeing that as a political global movement, we are not strong enough. We are not well articulate. Answer your preoccupation. I don't know where the common agenda is. The agenda that should articulate us between generations, between regional, local, and national levels. For me, as a person that has seen that kind of process, I think we've achieved a lot globally, but our current challenge is to make those advances, make those goals become a part of the states, so we can make sure that our peoples survive and our cultures survive, and that the diversity is always well respected in our countries via the recognition of political rights. I am 70, but I have still the same energy, the same conviction. I still think that there will be new strategies that work better, but just to end this part, I would like to say that in the 80s, the traditional leaders of this part of the world, they concluded that the indigenous movement, in order to have its self-determination, they had to also visualize their independence, their economic independence. So we don't depend from third parties. So that's a big challenge, how we can manage not to depend from third parties, from invitations to take part in all kind of scenarios. I think that's the challenge for this generation, because we got to Geneva almost monolingual, and that's why I speak Spanglish. But we do have other tools, and that's why I want to congratulate you, because you use these new tools very efficiently, and it should be very efficiently used to articulate ourselves and to use our abilities as advocates for our own rights with a global perspective. Because in countries when we are the majority of the population, we have to develop a strategy, and in those where we are not the majority, we have to develop a different strategy, and that's all what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarcila, for explaining that. And I think I'm always fascinated with like the people like yourself, Kenneth Deere, people that have been in the movement for a very long time, still being in the movement, still very active. It's almost like you're still in your 20s in terms of your determination and your perseverance. I'm also fascinated by, and this is a little bit of appreciation to you, how you continue to build the capacities of other indigenous peoples. You're very intimate or very involved with the FEMI training program. For example, it is well known amongst indigenous women. I work with Tribal Links Project Access. How has, and just zooming out a little bit towards the current pandemic, how has COVID-19 impacted your traditional education method? Has it impacted in a way? How did you adapt, or how are you going to adapt?
That's another big challenge because, as you know, from almost 408 million peoples that we are in the world, we are out the public politics. I mean, the state have not founded our places. We have not so much connectivity, for example. So it's a big challenge. For example, if the state imposes a virtual education, our children from the rural areas would be excluded. And another challenge is without access to the means of information, how can we communicate with each other if the state imposes the social distancing? We don't have the same access to the local markets, for example. So all this has some impact, and not only in what has to do with the communication, but also with the economic welfare of the different communities, because we exchange different products, very diverse products, and there are intermediates that want to buy them now that we can go outside, but at offensive prices, so to say. So we prefer to share or to donate things and wait until this thing goes away. You know that women have been always considered the very important core of family, because they have a lot of importance in what have to do with nutrition, and they have the responsibility to feed their families. And in communities which are colonized or invaded, male members try to go outside, work and get some money. So it's the women who have to manage to get on. I think that if you have leadership, if you have an idea, you have to work to walk together. And that means that nobody's left behind, that all the initiatives that I have all through my life was to work together with other communities. For example, in Peru, what we have now is a women institution, but it took us almost 15 years to sort of create this institution to nowadays be able to speak up and say that indigenous women have rights to have individual rights and collective rights. And the priorities are rights to land and territory, and not to be in any way part of any kind of violence. That's important because as women, we were always questioned. For example, the feminist movement, they said we only defended collective rights and not gender rights. Or a lot of our brothers told us that we divided the movement. But nowadays we can say that we defend our collective rights as women, but also the rights of all indigenous peoples, but especially children, especially girls. And we have to educate them with that collective approach to look for rights for everyone. Now we are more articulated, we have a strong national community, we are articulated with Canada and the United States and Central and South America, and we have the International Indigenous Women's Forum that is 20 years now, and we must and that we owe to the Canadians, because Mackenzie was there and her challenge was to have the possibility to get the indigenous women to New York, and we went there and we made a lot of changes. So we've worked very strategically, we've worked with diplomacy, and the question is where we can achieve more goals and where we should not retreat, so to say. So how can we build progressive goals that the states can implement in their national politics? So that's the strategy that we indigenous women have. And of course, the defenders of collective rights must not be persecuted, because all over the world, the defenders of the land and natural resources are almost criminalized. But what is the main tool that we can use to fight against that? Articulation. Articulation is a basic tool to get more rights and to achieve more goals. We've already done it in the OEA in Southern America. And well, now it's your turn. You that are more professionalized, and also we that have more history behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarcila. And I think you touched upon a very important point that I would like to expand a little bit more on, which is strengthening the indigenous leaders in terms of representation and accountability. You have been in the movement for a very long time. What are the things, it could be personality traits or mindset maybe, that you find very important that indigenous potential, the next generation indigenous leaders should have, so that they are strong in representing indigenous peoples and are accountable to their peoples?
Well, we see, and that's why I'm speaking about challenges, because for the new generations that has grown up in a different context, where sad enough, consumism is also a big temptation. And the facilities for passing from being a part of a religious people that doesn't have all the possibilities or access or to economy, it's quite easy there to be tempted, for instance, by a very well-paid job. And so eventually enough, if you don't have enough formation, if you don't have the training about your feeling of pertaining and your role as a member of an indigenous community, then it's very easy that the gap opens, that this connection gets lost. And so the challenge there, that the new generation that has opportunities should not break the link with their community. Nobody forces you, as it happens with us too, that the new generations of leaders gets back to the communities and gets back to live in sometimes terrible conditions, and that they again have to walk without shoes, because in the Peruvian Amazonian basin, for instance, in our region, very often we do walk without shoes. But the new generation wants to have shoes on their feet. They want to have trousers. They want to. Well, they need all these things, and for them it's natural. And it's just also that they want these things. So the challenge is, if I get an opportunity as a young indigenous person, professionally, I mean, in a job, in a job where I have some certain degree of power, I can't lose this opportunity with regard of the individual point of view. What I mean to say with this is that you need always to have this clear conscience of three things we always have tried to respond to. Who are we? Where do we come from? And where do you want to get to? So if we are from an indigenous people, belong to this people, we mustn't lose the connection with our community, with our big family in the wider sense, and with our community. So ideally, there would be this intergenerational link where you respond to a need, to a challenge, for which suddenly the leader community doesn't have any more the tools. And so this connection is vital. It is something that, for instance, I will formulate it like this. How do we achieve that in a scenario, in a wonderful scenario we have, in an important scenario for a community of any country in Asia, for instance, how not to break the heart of these persons because they are going to have a road, for instance, built on the territories. How can you do your work in international level without articulating ourselves in our countries? That is the conflict, and that is something that is very important. You have to be able to strengthen our capacities from a professional point of view and our leadership, and these things have to go hand in hand with a clear political vision, and at the same time in connection with our originary peoples, because it's them who gave us the life, and it's them who have to walk along during our lives. Of course, there are many threats, In our region, for instance, specifically in Latin America, we see that the interests of different political parties, political interests that want to co-opt people, persons, may it be men or women, and then, well, they pull this person out of the community, and if the people that are now challenged don't have the psychological strength, then they start to belong to this party, and then they lose the link, and they lose the capacity of strengthening our community. So they lose using our vote, and once they accede to power, they forget the compromises and the promises they gave to the people. And so what I want to say with this is that in these kind of spaces, we need, or we should, try to read, to be able to read the scenarios depending on the regions, and to construct little by little common agendas. Because before the 80s, the Indian movement that derived at United Nations was articulated by regions, with political leaders who were very clear, who arrived at United Nations saying, we are not the minorities, we are no minorities, we are not ethnic groups, we are peoples. And as peoples, they use the United Nations Charter strategically, and they succeeded. And so we have to add, we have to strengthen, and we have to know that the economical or financial resources are means, not the goal. And so, of course, we need this means, and we know that we're going to get help because of a sincere solidarity to help us and to join us in our strength, in our battle. But there are others who want to get our heads around, and so we have to be careful with these people who want to get us confused. So we have to see. As we say in Spanish, of course, it's an expression we don't have in English, but in Spanish, you have to see the teeth of the horse that has been given you as a gift. So you have to see what is in the sack. Because if you don't have any teeth, it's better not to get any gift, because I'm not be able to swallow it. That's what I want to say.
I think that's a very good. Thank you so much, Tarcila. I think that's a very, very important and very important that you made, and I also like this the saying in Spanish, and it sounds in English as well as it is in Spanish. So thank you so much for sharing that. We're coming all towards the end of the webinar series. Is there anything that we did not touch upon that you want to talk about that that there's or want Indigenous peoples to think about in terms of diplomacy or in governance?
Yeah, well, yes, with the subject of the governance there, specifically because you are a new generation. You have your own convictions, your own ideas, and your own strength. We, in the countries, we have, let's say, three scenarios. The scenario of the traditional community, the scenario of the urban spaces where many of our people had to migrate because they didn't have the favorable conditions in their communities. And the third one would be the international scenario or global scenario, where we were also being stratified as indigenous peoples. So we have some sort of higher class, middle class, and low class or poor class in this indigenous surroundings. So for me, in order to have a governance system that is clear and strong, we need to have a good or proper articulation amongst all us without treading on each other's toes, without leaving nobody behind. And how to combine the fight for indigenous people's rights for these brothers and sisters who are still in the community, defending their territories, insulating life into it, and using the resources we need for life and for health and for prosperity. And then on the other side, these professional generations that are in the cities or in other scenarios. But I mean, what we have to see that it is we need to strengthen this system. It has to bring us, so better to say, that we are finally, that we have the right, recognized rights, and that we have this dignity, men and women. We need this dignity. Nobody else has to feel like being out or outcast in local scenario, because we have achieved already the legitimization of our existence, acting in different scenarios during the last 70 years. But what we need now is to be able to strengthen ourselves internally, and to make this last effort of articulation and not of competition amongst each other, not for the scenario and not for resources. We need this effort. How we are going to do it, I don't know. There are going to be lots of initiatives, but anyway, we have to start working it. It's at least the idea is important of saying, knowing what we want to be in the future. We don't want to be the non-seen or the invisible ones in the statistics. We want to be visible. We want to show up. And we want the politics of our countries include us, with our characteristics, with our own features, and that the economical resources, the opportunities that exist, include us too. We pay our taxes. We contribute to the state. So why the state shouldn't include us? I mean, the new diplomacy has lots of challenges, my dear brothers. That's what I think.
Okay, Tarcila, thank you very much for your time and your comments in the last 15 to 20 minutes. We really appreciate your presence, and hopefully you can join us later in the series, perhaps, if Ghazali has ideas to bring about deeper discussions on issues like capacity building, representation, diplomacy, and many more.